Great. Thank you so much. And do I need to have that mic? So, no, you just I put this on. I just need to press the on button. Green. Yeah.
Aha, here we are. Well, thanks for inviting me here today. It's good to be with you. And thank you for the work. I just want to say up front for the work that you do. Many times I have one of our interpreters was able to, with one of our patients recently, we had a patient who for years said their pain level was 5. And just, that's all they would say, 5. And you knew he or she was in a lot more pain. And finally, the nursing staff said, you know, let's use words instead. So they tried words. Well, he picked the middle one again. And they said, okay. And the interpreter went over to the wall and picked off the faces and said, you know, because she knew this patient for years. And she said, you know, you have been saying that for a long time. Try this. And he finally was able to, like, find another, you know, find something maybe closer to what his pain level was that could translate and tell the team. Because a lot of their work was on pain control, and they wanted some levels of up or down, how he was doing. And it was the interpreter who, said, look, I think this might work for you. And so you guys have very good observation skills and know our patients well. So thanks for all the stuff you do. My name's Maya, and I have been a chaplain here for about 13 years. And I want to explain a little bit about what chaplaincy does. We have 4 chaplains here. One is at the UW, Deanna, who you might see, and then Michelle and Mike, you might have seen in a number of our teams. We're spread pretty thinly, but we really do appreciate our work and working with you. And my goal in our next 25 minutes is to just give you a chance to learn about what chaplains do and what we don't do, give a little more understanding. Maybe, how many of you have interpreted for a chaplain while you've been here? Okay, so not everybody has, so that might be something new. And also to learn the 3 different types of spiritual, religious, and existential distress. That is what we screen for, and that is what we address often. And for our most distressed patients. One thing that we do is we do give comfort in many ways, but we always want to tend to this. So I will say more about that later. And also to increase your confidence. I don't know if you ever get questions from patients saying, why do I have this appointment? I want to cancel this appointment. And with psychology, psychiatry, social work, and chaplaincy, we understand that sometimes patients do not or have no idea why they're meeting with us. And so sometimes they'll cancel before they understand. And we want to help you understand why sometimes we might be on their appointment lists, just so you have a larger understanding of kind of what we do here, okay?
So every patient has to be assigned is every patient has to be assigned for the chaplain?
No. And just like, so not all patients some patients will never see a chaplain or the other supportive care, nutrition, and social work. Some patients will never see us. So the way, I'll tell you the mechanism of how we get on their schedule. If they might ask for us, or someone else might refer for them, with or without their knowledge. And but there's another way too, and that's kind of a new survey that we're doing. So, but very good question. Thank you. All right. So spirituality, we define here not only as just we're not just religious. We're not just Christian or Buddhist or Jewish or Muslim. We really are here to help the wholeness of the whole patient. So we define spirituality as the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek meaning and purpose and how they express meaning and purpose. So that is something that we as humans all have in common, that we want meaning and purpose in our lives. And so that is where we meet our patients. And it's also the way that they experience their connectedness to the moment, just how they're grounded in the moment, their connection to their self, to others, to nature and to the significant sacred, which would be another way of saying the holy, or if a person was, you know, had a more specific religious name for that, of God or Allah or something like that, okay? Make sense? So we are probably more generalized than you might expect. We all have our own traditions, but we use the depth of that tradition to help others search for their own meaning and purpose in this experience. And often that can really change a person's experience here. They may have a lot of either some depression or anxiety, and religious, spiritual, existential distress might be what's stopping them. I had a patient who said, oh, I can't, she didn't want to do chemo, and she said, it's poison, I don't want to do it, you know, and it was really causing a lot of distress. And after a while of talking with her, we were able to what we call reframe, to look at it from a different lens of another way of looking at her chemo that might invite a sense of healing or a sense of hope for her. And that just calmed her down, and it helped her go to chemo without as much anxiety. And that just helps her whole treatment. Does that make sense? Yeah. So sometimes that intervention is actually quite important. Here's, we don't convert anyone to whatever religious background we are from. We talk with people of all faiths, and even people who may say, oh, I don't have any faith at all, or I'm not religious, or I don't even see myself as spiritual. We really try to find that common ground of what their own meaning and purpose is, and what's going to help them, what tools they have in coping to navigate suffering, to navigate uncertainty. We help people figure out, oh, I just said that. Okay, boom. We also help people with grief counseling, reconnection to their community, coping. Sometimes I do some guided imagery with folks. And then just the common human things of suffering, despair. Many of our cancer patients, in fact, I would say 99% of them, when one is faced with a diagnosis of cancer, you think, oh my goodness, you think about your life and your death. That is something different than a person going in for a leg exam or something, you know? And so it is that we really do have tools to meet patients with, is to talk about very difficult things and things that might be giving them anxiety that they don't even haven't really thought about by themselves before. And we partner with them so that that is not a source of, so that is not such a large source of anxiety, so that they can navigate through that and find their way of how they're going to hold that, the threat of dying, perhaps, or that just the suffering that goes along with treatment, all of those things. So that is really how we see our role. We also assess for spiritual, religious, existential, that's what that stands for I'll just say spiritual distress. We question, you know, their operating premises and beliefs that are distressful. I'll say a little bit more about that. And we partner with them and try to help reframe and give them grounding and supports. And now I'll just talk a little bit more. But any questions about that right now? Okay. So when we screen, not all chaplains in all hospitals do this. We are kind of more specialized here to do this. And we screen, we test we always ask questions, just like social workers do for anxiety and depression. This is what we do for spiritual, religious, and existential distress. We screen for transpersonal, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. And let me just say what those are. So transpersonal spiritual distress would be distress with the wider other, the holy other, God, feelings of abandonment, perhaps, of God or the universe, feelings of punishment. Maybe you've heard a patient say, why me? Why me? Why this? Why is this happening to me? And they might even address, they might say, God, why is this happening to me? Or they may feel like God is punishing them, or the universe is punishing them, the spirit. I use those interchangeably because there isn't one solid word for everybody. Everybody comes with a different language on that, and then and that's in English, and then you add another language onto that. So there's, you know, spirituality is very hard to navigate sometimes. Also, they might feel angry at that God or that Holy One, or just angry at the universe. Again, why me? This isn't fair. This isn't the way things should be. Yep. Okay. So that can really affect their distress. I don't know if you've experienced that with some patients.
Oh, I know.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, good. I'm all right. All right. I mean, you sit with them also on the side sometimes when they, and probably have heard some of these things as well. So,
so you are working with patients that sometimes you said they're not going to make it any longer, and the level of stress and all those questions. Yeah, you see them in a very sad circumstances.
Yes, yes, and you are there right at that moment. You are there right at that moment, holding that. Maybe while they page somebody else to try to come to hold it more, but you're right there, so you hear the first. Yeah. The second type is, so the first type was transpersonal. Oh, we're moving on. And the second type of distress would be interpersonal. So with the distress that I might have with my congregation, my community, it might be feeling abandoned by my friends. It might be by kind of this, you know, the human level of support, or it might be conflict too. You've been in those situations where okay, maybe the friends have left, especially for young adults. Often their friends aren't around or can't deal, and so they don't show up as much. We find that is a high incidence of that. Also, conflict with one's community or pressure, even from the family or their faith community. It could be their family. Maybe their family says, I've heard this, you know, they need to just pray harder or believe more or do this and go to, you know, they need to do all these things, and they're so anxious that they want what comforts them to comfort the patient. And the patient, it doesn't comfort them at all, and it seems to add pressure because they're either disappointing their parents, they're disappointing their spouse, whoever's giving that pressure, and they have enough to worry about, right? So that can be a conflict either way, or it could be that the patient themselves, maybe they are very religious and are worried about the kids that they have that aren't in the same faith habit that they were in, and so they worry about their legacy, and they have some distress of like, oh, what will happen? You know, I wish they just have their own regrets that they're taking on behalf of their kids. So it can be both those things, but there's pressure either way, or loss or sorrow. Here we go. I think that's it.
One of the things that I've seen a lot is that people that are very religious think that they did something wrong.
Yes.
And then they're being punished by God.
Yes, that is transpersonal. Yeah. And I'm glad you bring that up, because it doesn't only just happen to the very religious. It happens to people saying, I ate all the right things. I jogged every day. I did this. How could this happen to me? Or maybe I'm supposed to be, or they have a larger philosophical view that does make them feel like, you know, why, you know, I don't deserve this, whatever, you know? And so it can kind of broaden, you hear it in a lot of different ways expressed. But yes, in that very religious way, is God punishing me? And some may say that, and it's, there's a portion of people that I really assess and say, okay, so is that oppressive to you or not? Is that causing anxiety or not? There's a group of folks who would say, well, God's trying to teach me something and I'm going to learn. And it's not distressful for them, right? And we just have to stand back and go, it's not distressful for them. That's how they see the universe, or that is a battle of good and evil, and God's out there for them, you know. And so you kind of really, there's so many subtleties. Also, with that one, what am I going to say about that? Also with that one, I've seen folks also without a religious background, say, okay, I don't think God did this to me, but I'm going to learn something from it. You know, I think God's at my side, learning from it. You know, and so that's not oppressive to them, but they do take it as a learning experience. Everyone responds differently of how they're going to cope through. But very good, yeah, very good assessment of that. I really appreciate that. So it can be between you and God, or you and the holy other, or interpersonal. It could be that they had a tennis group or some singing group or something, or whatever their group is that met for dinner, their friend group that was very tight, and they are too sick to attend it. So they are displaced from their community, and that can be a tension. And so you think, or they were a gardener and they can no longer garden. You can't be in the dirt when you're doing chemo, right? And so their thing that connected them to the holy, to the, you know, that was transcendent, and gave them much calm, they can't do that. So now what do we do? So that's a very practical question, but it's also very spiritual. And that's something that I work with a lot of patients on. And then intrapersonal, you know, might be conflict of what I believed about life is not working for me now. What I believed about my faith or God is not working for me now. What I believed about my friends, I thought they'd show up for me, is not happening now. So what is that? There's some interpersonal conflict in that of what your own, they may have to readjust their philosophy of life or their outlook, okay? There's another point that just flew by. Hopefully I'll get back to it. You know, okay, any questions on that? Those are some samplings of things that might have come up.
Some might be like they say it's chance, you know.
Chance, yeah.
Aspace cancer from Aspace working only 6 months, and some after working even 30 years, they don't get it. Also, they say.
Yep. It's just, and most people, and often, I mean, and you can be very religious and not, and still say, yeah, this has nothing to do with that. Yeah, and they tend to cope quite well. And also some people adapt that after a while. You know, that's not the first place they go with their laments, but then they go, oh, why not me? You know, why am I any different than anybody else? And I hear that from people saying, oh, 2 weeks ago, this is where I was, or when I first was diagnosed, I thought, why me? And I was very mad. But, you know, I've gotten over that. I've kind of thought, why not me? I'm like everybody else. And they found that they're not isolated, and they see that it's just a piece of their common humanity. So those are, you know, people aren't there all the way. It's the people who really, who are distressful at that time, that we want to be able to assess. And why do we care about, oh, one more thing. It's existential distress, which really all of those include, but I'm just gonna lay out a little bit. People also experience loss of identity. Who am I now that I am a person with cancer, or that I don't work, or that I can't care for my family like I used to? All these identity things you see happening, right? That's a lot of loss. That's a lot of reframing. That's a lot of loss of purpose, you know, of definition, who I am. And that's also a very religious question for some. You know, some would say, well, you are, and that's enough, you know. But that's not how we all, you know, that's not how we all, where we go first often. Questions about fears and death, fears about death and life, or living with a disease, either way. Quality of life changes. Isolation and belonging. I no longer can be part of my workplace, or I can't, where do I belong now? You know, even as a survivor, I'm, you know, maybe part of my body, you know, I had surgery, and so I look different. I feel disfigured. Who am I now? Where do I belong? Who will love me? And meaning making, just making meaning out of a tough experience. So, and what does this mean? So those are some of those questions that come up. Are there any others that you find that you've kind of observed as well?
But it sometimes even seems that patients have to forgive themselves.
Ah, yeah.
Because of being sick of cancer.
Mm.
Like they go to shaking point where it says, well, I read that and that, and maybe you guys did that.
Oh, so maybe that caused my cancer,
Well,
especially for lung
it's like,
cancer.
it's like that you have to deal with all those things, which
Yes.
is overwhelming.
Yes.
And then it seems like you have to forgive yourself because because of this thing, you it's like you got it to yourself in a way. That's
Yeah.
into so many patients and so many
Mhm.
years, or interpreting for so many patients. It's just an SCCA.
And I want to say, these are deep waters, like are difficult, complex things. When I am speaking in English to a patient who speaks English as their first language, this is difficult. It's difficult for them and for me to find a common language. And that's what I'm trained in, is to figure out what their spiritual language is. When you add another language to that, it gets really, really difficult, as you know. And it's a lot on your shoulders, but as you know, it can get difficult. And I want you to know that I've been in situations too where just like there's a lot of medical words that we don't know. I mean, to me, that's another language. I don't understand half of the things, but I kind of learn how to talk about them with patients. But even if you don't understand some of the concepts that they're saying, if you can just share even if it's a weird word that you're like, I don't know what that is. That's some weird religious place. I don't know. Just say it as well as you can, and we'll put the pieces together as well as we can. You don't have, I mean, it's hard. There's such subtlety that I don't know how, it's hard when English to English picking the words and finding the right articulation and helping a person say something they've never said aloud before to themselves about life, about death, much less trying to share it. So I really appreciate all the deep work in the patients. These are hard conversations, and very, but very helpful when a person can finally feel like someone's heard them in that way. Because maybe their family doesn't. Maybe they have no one else to talk to about this, and that's what we try to provide. Why do we care about spiritual distress? Spiritual distress in patients has been associated with poor quality of life, worse life satisfaction, poor mental health, depression, anxiety, as you can imagine. Sometimes people are screened for depression and anxiety, but we always want that extra layer of, is the source spiritual? Because that's a whole, that's another specialty. So we work really close with social workers on that. It can also be associated with greater physical pain. Anyone who's been with a patient in the pain clinic or with palliative care, often, there's some, just working with palliative care folks who deal with that physical pain all the time, sometimes they'll say, Maya, we want you to see this patient. We've been working for a long time. We think that their pain is also more than the physical pain, or that the physical pain is connected to their spiritual and psychological pain, and we just think it would help to relieve some of their pain if you could get at some other issues with them. And that's true. It's just people carry, it feels a little mysterious, but sometimes they can't figure out where the pain is coming from, and sometimes there is an existential pain or spiritual pain. About 50%, so half of our cancer patients, studies have shown, have spiritual struggle, spiritual distress. Half. We know that we give out this survey before patients come. It's online. And we know that screening catches about 25%, so half of these guys. And so we know that the rest have to come by referral. And often those SKU stuff, it's online, so if your patients don't have online access, they haven't taken it. If it's in a language that they can't read, they haven't taken it. The question that we ask them though, so we have two places that we do these surveys. The other place that you've seen it is in infusion at their first dose. And it might be about 7 questions. And we ask patients these questions, and then if some of those questions raise a concern about spiritual distress, then we follow up with them at the next, or one of the next few infusion appointments. So those But, or we make an appointment with them. And that's when people get stuff on their list and it says, I don't know why I'm meeting with the chaplain. I don't know what that's all about. I'm not religious, that I shouldn't cancel that. Let's cancel. And so we want to encourage people that if they do have that, to be encouraged. We're trying to tell all staff to just encourage people to keep the appointment. If we're not a match, that's fine. But it really is an assessment of how, how they're doing more holistically. How they're doing and just coping. And also, we say, it usually should say chaplain introductory visit. That's what it should say. And when if it says introductory, it's just to introduce them to our service and the other supportive care services. I always say something about nutrition and social work and patient navigation. Because many of our patients, especially the general oncology ones, the ones not in transplant, may never meet any one of their supportive care people. There's so many of them, there's not a system to see every single one. And so we want them to know this is a free service, and we want them just to at least explain it. So at the very least, I'll say hello and just explain what else is there, so there's no pressure. So that really, we want to say, often my first question is, how is your support system? How, do you have family? Do you have, how are you being supported? How are you? And it's just a very, very easy, we want to know how people are coping. And then I might get into a little bit more of, if there is anxiety or about spiritual issues or not. But we really are very, we really are sensitive about that because we know that everybody comes from a different background and we don't want to offend anybody. We just want to meet them where they're at. Yes.
Where I'm from, when you call the chaplain or the priest,
yeah,
it's something pretty final.
Yes.
So people are very hesitant.
Exactly, and that's why I want to be here today because, and that happens with all our total population here and all of our staff, especially people who've been in military. That's when the chaplain's called. So yes, so those are the kinds of ideas we need to. We want to give you a little more space.
Is there a way of changing the name?
Dude, if I had the power to do that, I would. Do you have suggestions?
Social worker sounds nice.
We're not a social work though, but yeah. Supportive care is what we'd like. Counselor. I do sometimes say that for those of you, I say, yeah, counselor, yeah, yeah. Spiritual counselor. In fact, because I know that people use different words. I can only understand the Spanish speakers here, but sometimes I'll hear like, what am I, Oh, good luck on that. How are you explaining it? And then I'll say consejera espiritual. Or like that.
That term, it doesn't entitle to any religion.
Yes, yes.
Changing because psychologists before,
Yeah.
Oh, this guy must have crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Or psychiatrists know that. I mean, they get that too. Same with palliative care. They get that too. So we're not alone in this, but we do want to do something. And actually, that first introduction can really help. So find a good word.
Like emotional health.
Yeah. Yeah, it's emotional and spiritual health, right? Yeah, that holistic health. Yeah. So you can say, you kind of have to say what we are, but also to help explain that can be helpful. And we can do some of that too, because I can see what's on people's eyes when they first hear it, and I get that again, from any language background, might get this deer in headlights. Oh my gosh. You're the last person I want to see. What do you know that I don't know? Or they assume I'm going to just pray with them right there and convert them. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm not doing that. And so we understand that those first 10 seconds are pretty important. So anything you can do to help us, that'd be great. But yeah, spiritual counselor can be helpful, or emotional support. Some people are more religious. They want to know that that's a part of our capacity. So we want to offer that as well, whatever their religion is. And sometimes we're just helpful in assessing what people need. They might be here from very far away, or haven't connected to their religious community for a while. And we can help find a place that might have their language group or that might be nearby where they live that they could reconnect with if that's what they want. And so I once had to find, this was for the hospital, a person was dying and they were Sufi and they spoke Farsi, and we had about 24 hours to find somebody who would be able to attend to both of those things and visit them in the hospital. And we were able to do it. We really try to keep up our connections with the larger community to be able to provide that type of assessment. You know, I mean, those are kind of problems that we go, okay, let's try, you know, let's see what we can do. Who do we know? You know, and so we really do try to keep those connections in the community. These questions are the ones that we ask. Do you struggle with loss of meaning and joy in your life? Do you currently have what you would describe as religious or spiritual struggle? Those are the questions on the online assessment that every patient gets before they get here. Your patients, might, like I said, may not have answered that because they may not have access to it right now. Do you know how many languages that's in?
Right now, Spanish and Russian.
Okay, yeah. And then these are some of the other questions. So let's see, I'm just gonna, so people say, why is it on my schedule? I don't want to see a chaplain. So these are, I'm not spiritual, I'm not religious, I'm an atheist. I'm like, great. Are you dealing with your mortality? Yeah, okay, we got something coming. So, you know, but some people are just like, no, you know, and I'm a chaplain. I might not want to see a chaplain, honestly. I might be a person in a hospital that's like, you know, thanks. You know, we all have to, but when they see us in person, then they get to assess that. And that really makes a difference. That really makes a difference of how, you know, whatever idea they have, it makes a little difference. So, and we at least want to introduce our services and those of other supportive care. That we think is really baseline and important. Suggested phrases say this is routine, it's standard care, it's an introduction to spiritual care, or introduction to spiritual and emotional care. We may be addressing fears of, as you said, dying, or so, people think it's solely for religious people, but it's not billable. It's an opportunity to be introduced to folks on the team, and we've talked about all this. So is that helpful? Does that give you a little bit more idea of what we do and kind of what we try to navigate? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. We're going to, any other questions on that matter? And then we're going to move into resiliency.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Maybe just
yes.
To bridge something that I've heard before in regards to chaplaincy.
Yes. Oh, yeah. There is one big question out there.
So basically, to formulate it as a question, how often does it happen that patients don't directly answer your question and start talking and talking and talking? And is that talking still helpful to you,
yes,
even if they don't directly answer the question?
Yeah, that is, for us, that's very helpful. We're very narrative. I don't come like others come maybe, and they might have things that they're checking off a list. And chaplains typically do not carry a pen and a paper and take notes. We keep it all in our head, and it's very relational. That's just the way we work. And so we want to hear the story, and often I might not say, have you felt abandoned by God? Have you ever, you know, I might not start there because I don't know their spiritual language yet, and I'm listening to that. And I also want to develop a relationship. And so we do take a little slower approach, but often if I let people talk for a while about their support or how they're feeling about this, how they're doing, what's helping them through this so far, I often ask, they tell me, and they might get to this, you know, they might get to a deeper place. So that's okay for us. And I've had a situation where someone said, I don't know what they're saying to me. And I was like, I know, that's okay. Just say what, as much as you can, just try to parrot what they're trying to say. The person was talking about very specific passage in holy text that I could recognize enough words that I was like, oh, okay, this is the story that you're talking about. This is the passage. It wasn't really a story. It was in Paul. So I know I can understand that. I can't even understand that part of the Bible. So, but it was a very specific thing that was very dear to him. His family had no connection to that at all. He needed one person in the universe to say, oh yeah, so that's a really guiding piece for you, isn't it? how has that guided you through this? How is that helping you now? What does that mean? And so just to hold that meaning. And it took a while to get there, but it just, you know, I just want to urge you, don't become frustrated. It's just as frustrating for me. It's not quite as frustrating for me. It probably is for you in that moment, but just go ahead and just offer up whatever you can, and we'll put the pieces together.
You would appreciate the comment from the interpreter.
Yeah.
That the interpreter's having difficulty
Yes.
understanding it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can reassure them.
Yeah, absolutely. Or and we'll piece it together. I don't expect people to know all that. It's just like when I sit in medical rounds and I'm like, I have no idea what they just said, but it sounds like it's serious. So I'm gonna, you know, I mean, you know, I don't have to know every chemo and because I work with all different kinds of cancers and I can't keep up with all the protocols, and that's not my profession. So, but I can carry on a conversation with a person who knows what their chemo is and how it's affecting them, you know, so. Okay, yes, one more thing. Then we'll
So
move on.
how do you expect us to handle if, and this happened the other day where the chaplain asked the patients if they wanted to say a prayer,
Mm-hmm,
and they said yes,
mm-hmm.
but I really don't know the terminology for the prayer in Spanish that way.
Thank you very much. I don't either, which is, I can speak Spanish, but it is very hard for me to do the spiritual stuff. I have to say, I mean, to do that. What would you call that, Edmundo? It's like more codified. I mean, it's just it's a whole different specialized language.
Well, it depends on the religion too.
Yeah.
And I told the chaplain, I said, I'm not going to interpret that. The man said it was okay. He understood a little more.
Mm-hmm.
But the lady, and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to.
Can you interpret though? I mean, does it depend on the prayer? Because some prayers are very much like you pray for strength and healing, and you know, I mean, that seems to be like interpretable.
It's like Our Father, you know. I don't know how to pray.
That's a really,
that.
but that's a really specific, specialized prayer. So it seems like there could be I mean, are there some that are easier to than others?
I guess so.
Well, the majority of women that we have with chaplaincy are more, I hope God that everything is fine, or I hope it goes well.
This went a little bit more further than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so less conversational, a little more.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there are always workarounds when the vernacular is specific. So let's say the chaplain offers, can we read the psalm together? So that's very specific vernacular.
Yeah.
But there are workarounds. You don't have to do word
by
for
word.
Right. And now, obviously, if you are familiar with it, then you can. But if you're not, then there are workarounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think as interpreters, we are not specialists, but technicians, yeah?
No, of
You have
course
to have
not.
a
Yeah.
holistic,
Yeah.
because you can't specialize in
Right.
exegesis, contextually, the Greek word.
No. Oh, no. Well, we're not. And I don't talk to my patients with that either.
What if it,
Yeah.
Hinduism, you can't
No. Right.
have that access to
Yeah.
deep books or whatever. You just be general.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes in that general idea of understanding a specific, like if there's a specific word, we might get that and that might mean something to us. Or we might be able to ask more, what does that mean to you? And then they explain it, and then we know what they're saying by that, which is a pretty big chaplain way of doing stuff. But that also brings up prayer, which I still want to return to. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for her. And when you said I'm not going to interpret that,
just gonna
how
go
did
through.
the family react? When you said I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
they didn't feel offended? Okay, because
Say that again?
I wasn't that.
Say that again?
You weren't that brusque.
I wasn't that.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, but I'm not familiarized with.
Oh, okay. You
Yeah.
elaborated a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we gotta be sensitive to how the family's going.
No.
Well, that's
They might
true.
think, okay, it's not.
Yeah. Right.
But that
Right. And
comment of giving that feedback, that the interpreter, referring to yourself as the interpreter, is not familiar with the terminology,
Right.
and then giving the prompt or suggestion to the provider, that it may be easier to
Right.
talk, or it would be easier to interpret, go to something that's not very specific.
Specific,
Or more
okay.
general.
Yeah, it's not unlike asking a physician
Yes.
to lower their register.
Right.
Yeah.
This is true.
Absolutely, right, yeah, because when, yes, because they speak differently when they're trying to explain new terminology, right? Yeah, and we can do that too. There's sometimes when, if a patient wants a really specific, like the Lord's Prayer, which I don't know in Spanish yet fully, I can sing it, but I can't say it, which is awkward, so, so I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that. So those times when they appreciate, people will appreciate what you can give. And even as a provider, I have to say, I might be able to start a person off on it, or I'll say, you know, I won't do that, but can I just offer a prayer for you? You know, and even if they don't understand it, some people, they understand the motion and the emotion and the intention, and sometimes that's enough. So if you feel like you just really can't do that, you know, let people know what your bandwidth is on that, and or I'll try as much as I can, but I may not, you know, and just because you don't know what they're going to say all the time, you know, and so I'll do my best, but if not, you know, and so then we just have a moment and we negotiate that, and people nod their heads and go, okay, well, you know, we'll know that we were prayed for, you know, you know, and so that can be that, you know, I think we have to all show up in our authenticity and just do the best for the patient in that term, yeah.
Does it ever happen that you lead meditation or you practice relaxation techniques?
I do that a lot with my patients, yeah. Yes.
Do they request it? Is it something you suggest? How does that come about? Some
folks are exploring just a way to be more calm. Some ask for some sort of guide, you know, some guided meditation, and so yeah, I do that a lot. In fact, we could just, that's a good segue into this next section. Okay, well, thanks. If you have more questions, feel free to put them on the board or to email me those later. Okay, but thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And okay, so now this is about you. And I want to be able to this usually takes about an hour, so I'm just going to do a little light walk through a talk that I often do to a lot of staff, with a lot of staff here at SCCA. One thing that we know is that we work with patients who are facing possibly threatening their life, right? And that's traumatic for anyone. Some people glide through it with a lot of grace, but for many that can be a traumatic thing. We're working with people who maybe have a lot of losses. Even if they have a good diagnosis, they have a lot of losses in their life, and their job or their living situation, financial things, their health, all of that. We're dealing with people with a lot of grief, and that can be very traumatic. And so in many ways, our work, we are exposed, just like kind of emergency workers, we're exposed to people in a lot of distress and a lot of trauma. And what they call that is secondary trauma. Okay, so it's almost like PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress or whatever. But we experience many of those similar things at secondary trauma. And the reason all I want to do in this next half hour is raise that up of things that might kind of normalized. You know, we experience a lot of grief, a lot of trauma, and people are going through a lot of grief and trauma. And so we're part of that. And doing our work, we need to figure out how we manage that. How do we manage that in our life so that we can show up for the next patient, so that we can not be just, you know, have a cascade and heaviness of all of this, right? You see a lot of sorrow. And sometimes we take that with us home, and that can burden us down. It can be hard to talk to our family or friends. You know, it's deep work. It's just very, it's deep work that we do. And there's a price, frankly, that we pay for that sometimes emotionally, just because of that. And some of us sail through it just fine because of our personalities, and others of us have, you know, hold that. But we really care often for the people. And there's just, you know, I don't want to say a cost, but there's just a side effect of some of that caring. So in our particular context, which is different from if we were in, you know, in an office building or something, you know, it's just different content, right? It's real people's lives. You know? So one thing that's helpful is to find some practices. So I want to invite you just to take a few deep breaths right now.
Don't we ask everybody to turn off their fingers?
If you want.
The bell's going.
Yeah. But I just invite you just to take a few breaths, a little deeper than you usually do. And if you want to close your eyes, you can. If you don't, just kind of get a little fuzzy gaze about 12 inches in front of you. That can be helpful. Or if you want to keep your eyes open, that's fine. And if you're not into meditation, I'm just going to journey into it just really quickly, just give you a little taste. If you're not into it or really opposed to it, even if you breathe for 3 minutes, you're going to find the similar benefit, okay? So go ahead and breathe. So take a little moment and just breathe deeply. And I invite you to, we're just going to do an exercise because this is, you know, it's these types of exercises that get us into our parasympathetic nervous system and that also help us navigate through tough times. So a few deep breaths. Just take a moment and imagine someone that you love or somebody close to you who really appreciates you and cares for you. It could be even a pet. Imagine them that they're sitting near you. And as you breathe deeply, imagine yourself saying to that person or that pet or that other, may you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be whole. May you live with ease. Just repeat, you know, in your mind's eye, may you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be whole. May you live with ease. Taking breaths that are just a little bit deeper than normal. And now I invite you to imagine that person saying to you, just, you know, you deserve this sort of, this sense of peace as well. So imagine yourself hearing from your friend, hearing from this loved one, hearing them say to you, may you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be whole. May you live with ease. Just really savor that and hear it. May you be safe. Hear them say to you, may you be peaceful. May you be whole. May you live with ease. Now imagine someone, maybe it's a coworker or a family member, or maybe a patient. Invite them into this imaginary presence and just say to them, may you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be whole. May you live with ease. And now adding to that number all who are in this room and just even beyond, we can go beyond however big you want that circle to be in Seattle or the world, places of the world that you really want to give intention to. And imagine saying together, may we be safe. May we be peaceful. May we be whole. May we live with ease. May we be safe. May we be peaceful. May we be whole. May we live with ease. Take a few more deep breaths, and when you're ready, you can bring your eyes up. But savor what you can from this piece. So that's an example of some guided meditation that we use with patients, or that I do. And this one comes more by way of the Buddhist tradition, the loving kindness meditation that you might recognize, but really can be used by all. And what's helpful about it is, well, I'll talk a little bit more about the parasympathetic nervous system. But so resiliency, it's not just bouncing back from a tough experience, but also preparing for and adapting in the face of stress. And often we think, oh, I'm going to be with that patient again. Oh, that is such a hard situation. And we've known them for a while. And so it's not just recovering from that, but also preparing for it. I know some practitioners who maybe before they put their hand on the door, or maybe while they're gelling in, just give some intention of like, you know, may I be centered and may I be able to hold, you know, to be present in this conversation in the way that I need to be. Maybe I'll be able to give what I need to give, or not be, what I want to say, sometimes, you know, not be too fragile for this conversation. May I be present for them in the way they need that. You know, whatever intention you need to do to kind of center yourself, or just a cleansing breath of just being able to center and feel grounded. Those are opportunities that don't add time, they just add intention. And that can be a real resiliency tool in the work that we do, because you are there for, we are all there, but you are there for the whole day with somebody as they get some really tough news sometimes. And that's a lot to stay present for and to hold. And I don't know how you feel after those experiences, but sometimes I have to almost, you know, if it's a heavy visit, I almost have to, I'm very feeling oriented, so I almost have to go, okay, I just have to get this back to the universe because it feels heavy. And I need to be able to go home and be present to my friends, my family, and not carry this heaviness with me. But I also professionally want to be able to show up for it. So finding a way to transition to your home life is important at the end of the day. What do you do in that transition? Also finding, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about practices later, but that's one of the practices that I really encourage people to have, to find. All right, so why do we care about this? Why is this helpful? Breathing deeply, doing meditation, doing those practices that ground us, what that does for us is helps our body relax. It might slow some of our other functions down, but it also helps us rest and digest, which very important things in our life. Helps us, also slows down our heartbeat and our blood pressure and helps our immune system. If we're not doing that, we're over here, which is where our world mostly is. And why a lot of people are very good in healthcare, you know, nurses and people, we respond to emergencies, right? We're very good at fight, you know, the fight or flight response, being able to act on another when they're in emergency. Our heartbeat will speed up at that time, will increase blood pressure and lower the immune system. That's what over the long haul is not a good idea. So we live in both these nervous system branches, but when we have to react, when there's an emergency, we're here, but sometimes we stay here and we don't take a deep breath and center and let our body recover, right? And so the trick is not just to is to be able to, when you need to, go back and forth, right? To be able to regulate, we call it self-regulation, but be able to manage going back and forth to give your body a break. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I haven't had lunch. Right? Yeah. Because I've been hanging out over here and I'm just like, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. So there's another call and another thing. And the stress here, the pressure is high. So how do I just take a break? You know, the trick for me is to learn maybe every hour, to take a deep breath, to let my body relax and to, you know, before I go back. So it's not, so you're moving back and forth and giving your body some ways to recover during the day. That's a challenge. There's some tips to do that. You can put a little thing on your phone that dings every hour. You can do a lot of stuff to remind yourself. But finding practices and ways to recover and really help our body is important. But that's the sciencey part of it. One thing that we know, and we don't have time for this now, but one thing that we know that I encourage you to have a conversation with yourself or others about is, why do you do this work? Well, actually, if one person or 2 or 3 want to answer this, once we get back to our mission, that can help us when we're feeling burned out, when we're feeling stressed. is we say, oh, why am I doing this? It's like a married couple saying at their anniversary, huh? Like, why did we get together in the first place? Let's tell that story again. Wait, oh yeah, and they relive it, and they get, you know, I mean, in my mind's eye, maybe they do, but maybe they go, oh, I don't care. But hopefully they take that opportunity to relive it. That's why we celebrate anniversaries. That's why we celebrate birthdays. That's why we look back to the core of why did I do this in the first place, and get revived from that. And that really is a resiliency tool. So there are some reasons of why you've been attracted to the medical interpretation, but feels.
It's very humane.
Mm-hmm.
Humane.
Lovely. Yeah. Yeah.
Help a lot.
Yeah, and you feel like you're really helping folks. Yeah. Any others? Okay. Yeah.
For me, it's a bit of a payback. I lived abroad for a long time, and there were so many who interpreted for me, and so many who cared for me.
Yeah.
And for me, so in my way, I'm paying back.
Mm-hmm. Let me. Yeah. I'm just going to repeat those for the tape that's happening here. Is that so? For you, you said it was payback because when you were overseas, people interpreted for you, and now you can help them here. Lovely. And for you, you said it's humane. So, I mean, it really connects to our humanity. It's just a piece of helping others. Yeah, good. So that gives you an idea, but it's helpful to share those origin stories in more depth with each other too. And take that time. Some of you might be familiar with the word compassion. So that's called compassion satisfaction. It helps other people, helps us. Maybe we find growth. I find that with patients, I learn from them all the time how to navigate suffering. I learn, you know what? I'm not gonna wait till I'm 67 or whatever to live the life I want to live. I better start now because boy, some things could get in the way. And I must be a slow learner because I need to learn that about every 2 weeks. I mean, every 2 weeks I'm like, oh yeah, you know, don't just get in the grind. You know, you've got to figure out what you really want to do in life beyond this work too. So, so that's that vicarious post-traumatic growth, and also our own self-awareness. You really, you know, you're with someone, you're like, man, this reminds me of my father. This reminds me of, could be me, you know. We really get some deep self-awareness that kind of also is an emotional toll, frankly, but also self-awareness, that's the benefit. So what comes with this is also grief. And I have a little soapbox. I just have to get on and talk about grief because that is a piece of dealing with cancer, with people who have cancer. Even if they have a wonderful prognosis, even if they're going to live through this with flying colors, they have lost time. They may have lost something of their identity. Parts of their body have been, you know, surgically removed. They may have lost their job. They may have lost their spouse because their spouse couldn't deal with it. They may have lost their house because back in the days before Obamacare, you had to spend down lose your house so that you could get the insurance. They may have, you know, there's a lot of things that they may have lost. Who knows what they've lost? Or they've moved from another community. They've lost their support system. So many things, right? And so what I really say is we burn out not because we don't care, but because we don't grieve. Animals grieve, humans grieve. It's part of life. And we, in our work, may have to find different levels of how we manage that grief. And one kind of grief in this type of work, we want it to be easy. It's not. Grief is not that easy. But one kind of grief is what we call unrecognized grief. Grief that you just don't see. And it might be because we say in the clinic, I don't know, this happens especially in the clinic because people don't die in the clinic often. Very rarely. Only twice since I've been here. So we're with them, and then we just realize, oh, I haven't been assigned to be with this patient for a while. Where did they go? And then you find out, oh, they died. And then you didn't really have that chance to say goodbye or to thank the family or to, you know, anything. And so that is a common happening here. And that's what we call unrecognized grief. And it's we don't have a time for ritual. We don't have time to go to their funeral or their wake or to, you know, or maybe we don't know their address. We can't send them a bereavement letter? How do we do this? And so, so that might come up, or we think, oh, I should be able to handle this. I've been doing this for 20 years. I shouldn't be, you know. And so we give ourselves our social stigma about that, you know. Or we have a delayed misplaced loss of grief. I find that at commercials, certain, and also certain movies, I can't see horror. Well, I never could see horror movies, but I can't see a lot of movies about cancer anymore. I just don't have a lot of interest in that. And sometimes if they're just a lot of sorrow, I'm like, I can't quite do it. My friends are like, okay, I think I have a movie that you'll see with me, Maya. It's about butterflies and unicorns and rainbows, you know. Okay, I can do that. It has to have a happy ending, you know. I mean, I feel a little more shallow a little bit, but that's because my day-to-day life is real stories. I don't want to see a fake story on that. This is real. These are real dramatic stories. I don't need fake drama. So but I find that if some of those things come up, I might cry more than I used to before I had this job. I just feel like, I don't know if anybody saw that movie a while ago. It was this animated movie called Up.
Oh, yeah.
I was so mad at the person who brought me to that. I thought, oh, it's a cartoon. It'll be fun. It'll be colorful. And then the first 20 minutes, the guy's wife dies. This old man's wife dies. I'm like, oh my God, I'm crying. And I looked at her. I said, why did you bring me here? I don't want to see this. So, and then it was fine after that. Then then it was fine. But I just realized my capacity is a little bit diminished. I use a lot of it here, and I need a little more humor when I leave here, and I have to look for those opportunities. And that's kind of what I have to do in my own resiliency. But finding that ritual. Sometimes I do go to funerals. Sometimes I write bereavement notes. I might go to a funeral of a patient. Not all of them. I can't do that. There's no way. But I might go to a couple a year, and that really collects it for everything. You know, grief for one kind of invites grief for others, and that can be helpful. Or maybe it's a funeral even for a member of my community. And so that might be a space that I'm sitting still long enough to go, oh. But it is weird. It is weird to be in this work. I know a lot of dead people. That's weird to say, but it's true. And we have to figure out, how do we hold that? How do we hold that and honor that inside ourselves? Does that make sense? Yeah. So finding your ritual, whatever that could be a lot of different things. It could be journaling. It could be a bereavement card, attending a service, taking a short walk, or figure out your own traditions. It could be lighting a candle when you walk in your house to say, here, that will hold it for that person that day. It could be finding a way to hold vigil on your iPhone, you know, that there's ways you can light a little candle on the and that'll burn for 2 days. You know, there's a lot of different ways, but finding our way through that. Okay, moving on. Knowing what our own stress and grief indicators are. Those are mine. You ever see those with me? Say, Maya, you need to take a break. But stressor indicators, you know, it could be sleeping too much, not sleeping enough. Eating too much, not eating enough. It could be drinking too much, not drinking enough. Wait, no, I don't know if that works. Yeah, drinking too much.
He means water.
Yeah, water. Exactly. Not staying hydrated. Exactly. It could be being too sarcastic, or for me, I'm a pastor, and so when I start swearing, I know that I swear like a sailor. But when I start swearing in public, and not just with my friends, I know that I'm like, oh yeah, Maya, you gotta bring it in. Like, you might need to chill out a little bit, because you don't need so many F-bombs going around. That's ridiculous. So, so that, know what your indicators are. I lock myself out of my house, my car, everything. Like, that's what I'm really scattered when I'm stressed or grief. And I think these two have very similar indicators. So figure out what those are. And since you work here, say, am I just stressed out, or is it grief? You know, maybe it's grief. Go that deeper step and say, oh yeah, I had that patient. Yeah. Just kind of take a little moment and deal with that, okay? Or find a place to hold that. And it can be talking to somebody else who's had that patient. It can be all of those kind of relational things, okay? So I'd love to spend more time on that, but I won't. So here's trauma. I want you to take a look at these. I've given you a list right here, so this can be your assessment. If there are, here's 16, and I'm just gonna give you a chance right now to just look at these, but if you want to circle which ones seem to be more prominent for you, then we'll just take time to do that. And let me know if there's any way. So go ahead and just look on the screen, or if you want to look down there, that's fine. We're just gonna go through all these responses. So the first one is feeling helpless or hopeless. Or feeling a sense that one can never do enough, right? That happens, that we just can't do enough. There's so much work to be done. Hypervigilance, which just is that sense of always being on, never being able to turn off. Just what's the next thing? What's the next thing? It's kind of what we talked about before. And that's a real thing of traumatic stress, actually. Diminished creativity. Feeling like you're not able to give. And I find creativity to be a real helpful thing, counterbalance for all the grief and loss that I'm exposed to. I find that when I start getting a little bit burned out, if I move to try to just take even a half an hour to do something creative, that can be a really good respite and a way to sort of enliven me again. And it's a good, what I want to say, counterbalance. Inability to embrace complexity. That's been a helpful one for me. Minimizing, saying, oh, I'm fine. Oh, no. That's, you should, just being able to make the problem smaller so that it may really be for us. Feeling physical ailments or exhaustion all the time. Inability to listen, deliberate avoidance. When you just feel like you can't hear anything else anymore. Dissociative moments, not feeling like you're present. So I'm in the room, I'm doing something, but I'm not really here, because I just can't bear all this pain, and there may not be a logical reason for it. You just realize that it's sort of like, I might be with a patient and all of a sudden my mind just went to something very mundane in the rest of my life or something not mundane, but I'm not, and I have to bring it back and go, okay, clearly I'm a little bit full and I'm going to have to do something so that I'm really present for the next patient and also in this moment. But I might just kind of not be quite fully present with them. Sense of persecution, like, oh, I can't, they're doing this to us. I do that. I never get that here at all. Guilt, like, oh, I'm not doing enough. I get that sometimes of like, oh, I didn't do that right with a patient, and then I think, what is that about? I mean, what's real about that? We're probably doing our best. So. Another indication, fear, anger and cynicism, becoming cynical, inability to empathize, or just feeling numb, like you can't care anymore, like you just don't have the capacity to feel with them, feel for them. Addictions, like Edmundo was talking about. Like Edmundo is. Like Edmundo is. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. That's not right. Yeah, exactly. Sarcasm, cynicism. Okay, that's on me. That's on me. I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna take that off of Edmundo. That's on me. Grandiosity, inflated sense of importance relating to our work. Like, I'm the only one who can do this for him. And sometimes you might be the only one, like, especially in a language group, you're the only one. But are you the only one? So thinking of ourselves as the only, as if I don't show up, this all falls apart, everything. Yeah. Okay, so that's just a way of assessing how am I doing with this. I want to move on a little bit more through these to self-compassion. Let me just, I think you have on there something that talks about the self-compassion. Is that the next one? What's the next one? Oh yeah, the next sheet you have will help in some of the questions that we do afterwards, the caregiver reactions. So there's a lot of words there about what are the reactions to trauma for your cognitive sphere, emotional, behavioral, spiritual, interpersonal, physical, and then also even the impact on professional functioning. Do you see that there? And at the bottom, you know, absenteeism, increase in mistakes, withdrawal. Some people withdraw from others when they're just feeling that stressed. Then some people just overshare and just you're like, dude, you need some help, you know. No. But so this is helpful, just giving more words to those things. And even, you know, in the spiritual way, sometimes we feel a loss of purpose, a loss of meaning or hopelessness. Then I think what I have for you on the next sheet is self-compassion assessment. This is my new, it's not my new thing, but Kristen Neff has talked a lot about how self-compassion has been going on for years, thank goodness, but we're not all that good at it. And so I invite you to have a conversation with yourself about how am I doing with self-compassion? What kind of things do I tell myself? Am I judgmental? Do I say, oh, you should have done that better when I do something? Do I do that? Do I, here's some examples. Kristen Neff does a wonderful job. Here's the first, well, I'll give you the examples later. These are the benefits. Self-compassion decreases anxiousness and depression, decreases burnout and exhaustion, increases compassion, and like you were talking, increases the ability to forgive. So all those things, once we help ourselves, it's how I always tell my providers, then we're able to help others in that way too. This is really your own, like they say, the oxygen mask when you're on an airplane. Being able to help ourselves, and it doesn't have to cost more time. So, you know, do we take a balanced view of things, or do we sometimes obsess and fixate over our mistakes? Are we saying, you know what, I feel alone in my failure. I'm the only one who ever did this wrong. Or do we think, you know, other people have done this as well? Or are we sometimes very judgmental about our own flaws? Or are we more kind and give ourselves some caring and tenderness? Those are some of the questions. There's more here and more online, and I'll just give those to you to look at. But I really highly recommend looking into some of her materials and some of the practices. You know, one of the practices of self-compassion, I don't think I gave that to you, I just realized, but I can hand that out later, are these. One of the ones that I like, we did the loving kindness meditation where you heard your friend talk to you and say, may you have peace. That's one way. Invoking the voice of a loved one as your own voice, saying, oh, you know what, Maya? Dear Maya, you did goof up again, but you know what, you're going to be okay. And it's not, you know, being able to nurture that voice for yourself, that's soothing. That's also, this is another practice too. You're with a patient and you're just overwhelmed by how much struggle they're having, and you almost feel as if it's your own, and you just say, one for me, one for you. So you breathe in, one for me, breathe out, one for you. And it's a way to keep in connection, but also give some spaciousness for yourself, okay? We have about 1.5 more minutes. So,
you have 10 more minutes.
I have 10? Right, okay, well, I'll get this done, but we're always practicing something. So even if you don't take any of this unsolicited advice that I gave you today, you can just know that you're practicing something. So if your practice is, oh, I'm a horrible person, I'm an idiot, that's your practice. Good luck on that. That's not a good idea. So try something else, okay? So we're always practicing something. So what is your practice? I always, you know, are we in that sympathetic or in the parasympathetic? Can we move back and forth? When we're making a plan, I suggest these 3 things. What is your ongoing practice? Do you bike to work? Do you eat well? Do you, you know, yes. But are you a biker? Bikers always identify themselves. Always in my groups are like, I bike to work. I'm like, you are awesome, and I wish I could do that. And we all want to be them, right? Yeah. So good for you. Come fix my bike. Because bikers are pretty, that's a really healthy, I mean, honestly, that's a really good long-term ongoing practice. Good transition in and out of work. It serves a lot of these places. What do you do spiritually, centering wise? Do you debrief? Do you do some remembrance stuff for all that grief that we were talking about? What's your ongoing exercise or growth practice or creativity practice?
Happy
Creative happy hour. Great. Okay, this is even getting bigger. What brings you life and renewal? Just think about what that is. Or is it a social thing? Do you have a social group that supports you, a community? Whatever that is, you don't have to have all of that. Just what is giving you life in that constant form? Do you have a habit that's consistent, that's creative, consistent, or helping your whole self in some way? That's the stuff that sometimes if you keep saying, people's eyes glaze over and will be like, I can't do one more thing. I can't do anything. But so I always talk about the in the moment practice. Assess how you're doing in the moment. That's like that one for me, one for you. Or do you have a way when your day is going and you haven't had lunch by 2, like to recenter? Do you have something in the moment of when you are there, when the patient hears that they have 2 weeks left to live? And you can see what is going on, and you probably understand more than anybody else in that moment what that person is saying to their spouse and what they're processing. How do you center in that? How do you keep your strength in that or after that moment so that you're ready for the next patient that you have an appointment with, right? How do you do the turnaround when you feel like maybe that did drag you down more than you thought it would, or anyway, what are your in the moment practices? Often there can be breathing. They can be maybe somebody, especially there's a lot of traditions that have prayer beads of some sort. That can be a physical thing, or a little something in your pocket, a rock that you have from a place that means something to you that can send you right back there. That can give you some relaxation. Maybe you were at a beach that just is what relaxes you, and you just have some symbol with that. Or maybe you can just do that visually, a little postcard in your head. Think of what that is that grounds you in that moment. Kind of those in the moment practices. Or what do you do when you gel in and gel out? What do you do to give intention or to ground yourself, to give yourself a breath and slow it down? Because everything is urgent here, but we have to find a way to ground ourselves in that. So ongoing practice, in the moment practice, and then what I talked about earlier, the role shedding practice of transitioning from work to home. What do you do? I know some folks who work in scrubs, they're like, yep, the scrubs go off, I get new, like I'm a whole new person, or I have some, maybe they do some specific thing if you go home on a ferry, or if you listen to music really loudly as you go home, whatever that transition is. What is that? I knew someone who went home and they said, when my 3-year-old comes and just runs at me and gives me a hug, then I'm there, So like, what is that moment? And it could be something you're already doing that you just add intention to. So does anybody have those kinds of things that you do just to kind of let this work be here and let yourself be open? Because I don't know, if when you say you work at a cancer center or you work with people like that, what's people's response?
How can you do it?
How can you do it, right? And they go, oh, that must be so hard. And then you're like, oh, I can't tell you more because you're not going to make it. Like we really need each other in this type of work because we're especially skilled for very deep work of life and death issues with people and people facing that. Yes.
I was going to say, not always you have to do that. I mean, sometimes I go home feeling pretty happy because of good news.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I want to acknowledge that too.
I actually get a lot out of it that makes me feel happy.
Yes, absolutely. And so no, and I don't want to characterize that as that. Yeah, this is, that's because he bikes to work. It's because he bikes to work and he's new. Yeah, no, but that is another practice that they found some evidence-based studies, blah, 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 on, is that, you write 3 good accomplishments of the day or 3 successes of the day or 3 things you're grateful for. And that, you know, some people do that at their desk and then they move on, or they do that on the bus and then they, you know, it's a way to kind of make sure that you are paying attention to those things that have given life that day. So that is actually proven to help in resilience. So you bring that up. Okay. Yeah.
It also has a work technique.
Uh-huh.
You can picture a conference with 3 doctors and 5 family members.
Yeah.
Telling somebody that's going to die and coming out your child.
Yeah.
Then you are interpreting everything that's happening with this very complex terminology.
Yes.
And then very complex emotional issues going on, everything at the same time.
Yes.
And you have to take yourself out of that moment. And
Yes.
I took a class once at the Bellevue College. It was very interesting.
Uh-huh.
How to go to a place, a happy place, right? Where you
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
really, you have to start thinking in Disneyland.
Mhm.
Even though you're saying all these things, because
Right.
your concentration has to be at your job.
Yeah. And you need
It's very
to,
important that you don't start crying.
yeah.
You don't lose
And you need to minister to yourself in that moment. I mean, that really is that self-compassion or self-care in that moment. Heart Math does some stuff with that too. Kind of like you said, you go to Disneyland, but they say that, you know, it could be just the deep breathing, but you know, if you add, and Kristen Neff talks about this, if you add an emotion, a positive emotion with that, and if you're good and practiced at this, you can just, you can say, okay, I just want to breathe in and experience some, you know, joy, or I want to experience just calm, or whatever that emotion is, or love. You know, you can do that for 2 minutes in between patients, or you can do that in that moment, just kind of imagining that, you know, that place. Yeah, just something to ground you. You need a grounding in the moment many times for this kinds of things. So figure out what that is. I kind of imagine my feet sometimes, you know, just being roots that are going to go to the center of the earth. And I kind of imagine that sometimes with all the people in the room, because if it's, especially if the family is really kind of, you know, everything's kind of chaotic, just to try to ground the room and just do what I can in that way, because it's not going to make it worse, you know. All right, well, this is about all the time I have, but I hope it gives you a little idea. I do have, you know, just think about what your practices are. There's many things that you could do, or just different intentions to take in the moment, and it won't add time. But whatever your practices are, I just want to thank you for what you do and for how you kind of navigate through it, and know that social work and chaplains are both here for you. If you just need a little extra person to talk about it with, I mean, we do really want to be available just for your emotional and spiritual support. And Mundo, did you want to say a word at all or not?
Oh, with one of the other chaplains, and maybe Maya will join us, we're putting together a workshop. Thanks to Zena, I'm figuring out how to get it accredited. And the workshop will be maybe around 2 hours, and the purpose of it is self-care, because sometimes we find ourselves having gone through or having experienced these traumatic situations, and you know, while maintaining confidentiality, as an example, it's very difficult to get it out. I mean, because you can't really speak about these patients to anyone. You can't talk to your spouse, you can't speak to your children, maybe your cat or your dog, you could, because they don't understand, or whatever. But and so that's going to be the purpose of that workshop. Just
okay.
And thanks, Mike.
Yeah, you're welcome, Edmundo. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I know we have to go to the next speaker, but if you have any more questions, you can just email them to me. The leader will have that for you. And thanks so much again for you. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you.